Good afternoon, everyone. I am so delighted to welcome Jeff Ostroff to the Great Careers Network. So, Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and what are you doing these days?
It's like a great question to start with, Lynn. And it's probably a good idea as I think about it that we're doing an interview because that's really what we're talking about here today. Only our focus is on online interviews. My first career was focused on primarily three things: communications and marketing, communication slash marketing, the aging population, of which I've become more a part of, and to a great extent, the healthcare industry. And probably the most important thing that I did during that first career, which included a lot of communication stuff, presentations, and so forth, I wrote a book called Successful Marketing to the 50 Plus Consumer. I took some time off after I retired from that first career and started to work on things that were of great interest to me, passions even going back to my childhood. Today, what I'm focused on is doing professional interviews with people who want to promote themselves, their organizations, their products, their services, their book, whatever it is. And I principally do that on my Voices in the Spotlight platform. I also help people create podcasts and shows. I consult with people who want to do that sort of thing. And I also host other people's shows or podcasts. I have my own podcast. It's been around since June of 2020. It's called Looking Forward. It's all about opportunities. And one quick thing I'll mention there is we've got a special report coming out, I would say, in the next week. And it's going to talk about 5 great opportunities for 2025 based on the experts with whom I've interviewed on Looking Forward. It's all about opportunities. They're global opportunities and they're based on marketplace trends.
Awesome. So, when did you get interested in doing interviews of people?
Now that's a good question, Lynn. It actually started when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And this is kind of an important point for anybody who's on this Zoom, and hopefully for other people that they may share this with. But if you're thinking about what would I want to do with the rest of my life, or what do I want to do in my career or a second career or changing careers, I think it's always helpful to take a look at what did you do when you were a child that you just did naturally. Nobody had to beat you over the head and say, practice piano, or that sort of thing. My dad of blessed memory bought a 7-inch reel-to-reel tape recorder when I was about 7, and it had a microphone with it. And almost from the very beginning, one of the things I did with that tape recorder was interview family and friends. And it just came very naturally to me. I remember people got a kick out of it. And so that, and the other thing that I did with that microphone was announce things. And I'm doing voiceover work today, which I don't believe I mentioned earlier, but I also do voiceover work. And so that's what got me interested. It was just something that came naturally to me, Lynn, when I was about 7 years old.
Wow, got an early calling. That's fun. I
An
wanted to
early
be an
caller.
art teacher, and then I wanted to be a French teacher, and I did become a French teacher at one point in time, but never became an art teacher. So good for you that you've been continuing on. All right, so
Yeah,
I know
thanks.
your focus today is on doing online media interviews. So are we just talking about podcasts and radio interviews, or what you got going?
Well, the tips that I'm going to give are principally for people who are going to be going on podcasts or radio interviews, or the kind of interviews that I do on Voices in the Spotlight, which are just for promotional purposes. However, most of these tips, as I think people will see, could easily be applied to TV and even the job interviews, which I know is such an important part of the work that you do, Lynn. So I think that's something else that people might want to keep in mind. And I would encourage everybody, since I don't have slides or anything, to jot down the tips that you find of particular importance, or jot them all down.
All right, so let's start with these tips. Don't keep us waiting here. Where do you want to start?
Okay. I do want to emphasize that there are many tips for coming across well if you're doing an online interview. I'm just going to hit upon a few of these in the time we have, and I'm not even necessarily going to present these in priority order, but I thought that these were some of the more important ones to share with everybody today. And the first tip may sound kind of obvious, but from my experience, it's something that a lot of people don't seem to pay much attention to. And that is, you need to know the platform or the show or the podcast that you're going to be on. For example, is the audience that it's supposed to reach right for you if there is an already predefined audience? Now, there are exceptions to this. For example, with Voices in the Spotlight, basically it goes out to a lot of places, and then you, if you're the person who's got the voice in the spotlight, you decide who to send it out to. But clearly, if you're going to be on a podcast or some other kind of a show, radio or otherwise, they're going to decide who the audience is. So I would encourage you to do some research and find out if this seems to be the right fit for you. Listen to an episode or two of that show or program. And I can't tell you, Lynn, how many pitches that I get for my Looking Forward, It's All Opportunities, All About Opportunities podcast, where the person clearly not only hasn't listened to an episode, but they don't read the description about what it's all about, because if they did, they know it's promoting your expertise in speaking about a particular trend and the opportunities that that trend is creating for people. And I will get people pitching me all the time. I would say 95% of the pitches I get are people saying, Jeff, I'm a great coach. I just wrote a book. I'm going to show people how they can succeed in their life and their career. It's not a fit. That's not what I'm looking for. So it's really important that you do that. And I will tell you, I actually started 2 interviews with people, and we got about a quarter to a halfway through with each of these. One was somebody who was an expert on sustainable energy. That was the topic he was supposed to be an expert on. And the other guy is an expert on IT. And they knew, or should have known going into the interviews, I was going to ask them what kind of opportunities was that going to create in the marketplace. And they basically got to that question. They said, well, this isn't really what I know about. I don't really think I can continue. So tip number 1 is you need to know the platform. And of course, that also will affect where you might want to market, or if you have a booking agency or some other PR agency promoting you, they also need to know that. And it will also affect, again, who you promote or try to promote to directly or using that agent.
It's crazy that people really don't take the time to read carefully. It really is crazy. But
It
anyway,
is
it
crazy. It is
happens.
crazy. And it happens. And again,
Yeah.
it's reading the job description, but I'm going to kind of come back to this again with this second tip, because it's not just reading, even better is listening. So tip number 2 is you need to know the interviewer. And there are several reasons why you need to know about the person who's going to interview you. First of all, is this person an attack dog? Is this person looking for controversy? Do you want controversy? Do you want somebody who's going to perhaps put you on the ropes? I myself never do that. That's not my style as an interviewer. And I always tell my interviewees that because years ago, when I got on a radio program, this is way before the internet, I was working for the Medicare program, and I got ambushed by the radio interviewer who was attacking the Medicare program. I'd never had that before happen to me. And here I was trying to defend the Medicare program, which everybody else always gave me an easy time with. So that's one reason why you want to get a sense as to who is the person who's going to interview you. The second reason that you want to know the interviewer is that if you can get to speak to them ahead of time, it's going to give you not only a better sense of what they're like, who they are, and their style, which you will also get by listening to a recent interview they've done. There's where the listening comes in. But it also will strengthen the rapport that you have with them, which is going to make for a better interview for you. And I can tell you, I'll give you just a couple of names of people who I've interviewed. This is for looking forward. It's all about opportunities. Lauren McDonald, who is an expert on electric vehicles and the electric vehicle industry, and James Cridland, who is an expert on podcasting and radio. They have been on the show each 2 times. Actually, James has been on 3 times, but twice to talk about podcasting. And the second interview was definitely better than the first because I already knew them. Now, sometimes the interviewer is going to say, nah, I don't have time. These are people who might do an interview a day, or 2 a week. I don't do that. But for people who do tons of them, they're not probably going to give you the time to do that. So the best you can do there is communicate with them through email or maybe through somebody who works for them. But optimally, if you can speak with this person on the phone or even better on video like this ahead of time, it's really going to help to maximize your performance on that interview. And one more thing there, again, emphasizing the importance of listening to the interviewer, because you want to get a sense by listening to just a little bit. I mean, if they have a 25-minute or 45-minute, we'll say a podcast, just in listening to 25 or 30 minutes, you'll get a sense as to the flow of that show and the style of the interviewer. And that will prepare you to ask them questions before you actually do the interview, whether you're asking them those questions right before you do the interview, or preferably maybe a week ahead of or 2 weeks ahead of when you're going to do the interview.
Excellent. All right. So we're going to move on to tip number 3. And I also want to mention that if anybody has any questions anywhere along the way, please feel free to jump in. But I will also ask that again. But take it away for tip 3.
Yes, absolutely. Anybody that has a question, feel free, put it in the chat, and Lynn will relay it to me. And I'd love to get those. They're terrific. And they can even be about, as long as it may have some more applicability to the other people who are on, it can even be about something in your own personal experience, something you're dealing with. That's fine too. So tip number 3, again, would seem to be pretty obvious, but we don't always think about this before we're going to be interviewed for some sort of an online program. And again, I say online. If it's not done online and you're in a studio, that's fine too. These will work just as well. And that is to know what you're going to focus on and what your desired outcome or call to action is. Many of you are probably familiar with the famous author Stephen Covey and all of the 7 habits and so forth. His second habit was, for highly effective people, was to begin with the end in mind. So you need to think about, if you're going to be pitching yourself, or if you've already pitched yourself and somebody says, yeah, come on, chances are then you've already given this some thought. What are you there to talk about? What do you want people who hear or see you to walk away thinking? What's the call to action here? And here again, you want to make sure that that meshes up with the show, the platform, the interviewer's perception of what they think you're going to be on for, and their style. And I will refer you back to the two people I alluded to earlier, just as examples, one an IT expert and one an expert on sustainable energy. They thought they were coming on just to talk about IT stuff and sustainable energy stuff. But what they didn't realize was, yeah, you're there to promote your expertise, but the focus of the show is also on trends related to IT and sustainable energy and where the market's going now and into the future and what opportunities that is going to create for people, which is really the essence of looking forward. It's all about opportunities. So part of your preparation needs to be understanding the why. Why are you going on this particular platform? And what is it that you want to achieve once you're being interviewed? What do you want people to say, do, think about after the interview is done?
All right. How about tip number 4?
Okay, I'll move to tip number 4, which blends in perfectly with the others. And again, it might be a good idea, not again, but Lynn, it might be a good idea for us to stop after tip number 4 and just see if there are any comments or questions. So tip number 4 is to have 3 silver bullets that you must get across during the interview. Now, in the last part of my first career, I worked as the head of communications for a network of 10 VA medical centers and clinics. There were many clinics, 10 medical centers. And at one time, I went to public relations training nationally. And believe it or not, at that point, I'd never heard this terminology, 3 silver bullets. And that's when it was first introduced to me. And it's so very, very critical. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of what I'm talking about here. So let's say, for example, you're going to do an interview and you are the founder of a business. Your 3 silver bullets might be, I've got to make sure that I tell people what my product is. Now, my product may be me. Maybe I'm a consultant. I'm a founder of a consulting business. My product could be some sort of a device, or it could be a book. But whatever it is, you want to make sure you tell people what that product is. The second reason, the second thing you want to tell them is you want to give them a reason, if you're a founder now, why they should invest in that product, because in this particular instance that I'm giving you an illustration of, you're actually looking to launch a particular product. So they need to know why. You've got to make sure in this interview, no matter how long it is, that you're going to be able to give people a reason why they should invest in your product. And then the third silver bullet might be, how do they go about investing? What do they have to do? Is there a website? Is there an email? What do they do next? Let's say you're a fitness coach. In that case, maybe the 3 bullets might be, you want to tell people your credentials. You got to make sure you do that. Why should people even pay any attention to you and what you might be able to do for them in the fitness realm? You would also want to make sure you got across to them, how do you typically work with your clients as a fitness coach? And again, you don't need to make these things long-winded. You may not have a lot of time, but that could be your second bullet. And your third bullet, again, might be, how do people reach me? How do they end up learning more or doing business with me? And my last example, and Lynn, I'm really doing this as if we're talking to people who are really looking for another job or a new career. So let's say they're going on a job interview, or actually it's an online job interview, as so many are these days. Well, in that case, the individual who's seeking the job might think in terms of getting across their relevant experience for the job. That's a silver bullet. Why do they think that this organization would be a great one to work for? Of course, they have to do research ahead of time for this sort of stuff. And then the third silver bullet might be, what can they do to help? What can this person do to help that organization improve in some way, whether it's in sales, motivation, revenue generation, whatever it might be. So the point again of this is, have 3 silver bullets, 3 points that you know ahead of time. I got to get these across. I got to nail these. I don't have to spend a lot of time on them. I can come back to them again. And you'll often see politicians doing this sort of thing, or somebody who's a persuasive speaker doing this sort of thing. They've got the 3 bullets in mind that they absolutely have to make sure they don't forget to mention during their interview or speech.
So in an interview, that aligns with my thought process when somebody asks, tell me about yourself. And they want to reflect back, what it is that's in the job description and pull out those 3 things. So I think 3 is a magic number. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, 3 is often a magic number.
Absolutely. So does anybody in the audience have any questions that they want to ask on this topic before we move on to another tip? All right, I guess it's time for tip number 5.
Hearing none, we will move on. And if you happen to think of something at any time, just put it in the chat and Lynn will relay it to me. Here's another one that might sound obvious, but it always bears repetition. And that is, if you're going to do an interview, you got to come to that interview with energy and enthusiasm. You do not want to come to an interview unless it's absolutely unavoidable. Let's say you're going to be on some major network like the Today Show or something, and you know that if I don't do this today, they're probably never going to bring me back again. Well, then you really can't back out of it. But I would encourage people to not do an interview if you're not feeling yourself, if you're not feeling well physically or mentally. Just give the interviewer notice. Now, again, sometimes you can't do that, but just give the interviewer notice as soon as you can, because you don't want to do an interview when you're not feeling enthusiastic and inspired about what you're talking about. There's no question that energy and enthusiasm not only inspire people to pay attention and possibly help you achieve your desired outcome. What happens is, if you're excited, the interviewer gets excited, and the interview then ends up going that much better, and you have this even better rapport that you're establishing with the interviewer. And I'm going to cite an example of one of the best interviews that I've done. And it was with a guy who posts on LinkedIn a lot. Some of you may have seen his posts. His name is Manuj Agarwal, Manuj, last name Aggarwal. And Manuj's assistant pitched me to be on Looking Forward. It's all about opportunities. He happens to be an expert on AI. And from the moment that he got on the show, and we communicated before then, but I don't believe we communicated face to face, but we were doing email stuff. From the moment he got on, he was so enthusiastic and energetic, and not over the top, by the way, but he was so excited, so enthusiastic, so pleasant and cheerful, upbeat, all those words. It made for just a fantastic interview. And even though I had given him a few questions ahead of time to be prepared for, it was much easier for me when I'm interviewing somebody like that to come up with a lot of ad hoc questions that makes the interview seem even more spontaneous and shows that there is this tremendous amount of back and forth and harmony between the interviewer and the interviewee. Now, I will contrast that because I've had, fortunately, only a few interviews where the people were so dry and so unemotional, and they gave such short answers that I found myself struggling to make it through. I had to quickly think about more things to ask them. And those are the things that will really kill a good interview and make it so hard for an interviewer, is when you don't show a lot of energy and enthusiasm, when you don't show much emotion or passion about your topic, if it's called for. I mean, some topics may not call for a lot of passion, but I'm talking about in general here. If you're going on an interview, I would like to think that you're fairly passionate about what it is you're going to talk about. And that passion will show or not show. And what you may not realize is it not only has an impact on the audience, it has an impact on the quality of the interview itself, because it makes it extremely difficult for the interviewer to deal with somebody like that.
Absolutely. Like every day I get up and I'm excited to start my day because I love what I do. I'm passionate about it. And I'm sure everybody else here is also. If not, then maybe you need to reevaluate about what you've got going and what the future holds. So, how about tip number 6?
Okay. No questions as yet. I'm relying on you.
Nope, no questions.
Okay. Well, we'll move to tip number 6, which actually I could spend a lot of time on, but I'm also going to be mindful of the clock. Tip number 6, again, it's something that it's not rocket science, but it's really important and bears mention. And that is, when you're being interviewed, whenever you have the opportunity, use anecdotes, examples, metaphors, anything like that. Firstly, because there's almost nothing that works better to grab people's attention and to help you make your point. Some of the best interviews that I've done have been with people who are very good at doing this. I had a gentleman who was on one of my podcast episodes. He's an expert in the pet industry, and he was great at doing this. And I remember early on in the first interview that we did, he told a story about his early interest in pets. And he told a story about his 72-year-old parrot. Now, how many of you are going to forget about a 72-year-old parrot? It was a great story, and it fit in perfectly with his telling you about how it all got started for him. I did a Voices in the Spotlight interview with a guy named John Welsh, who's a photographer and filmmaker, and he wanted to make the point that experience matters if you're choosing a filmmaker or a photographer. And so he told the story about when he was working on a film with a painter who had had a stroke. He was now 80 years old, and the painter relayed to John, as John was interviewing him for the film, about how somebody once asked him not that long earlier from when the filming was being done, how long it took him to do these paintings of Marilyn Monroe and these other people. He was a pretty famous painter, apparently. And the guy said it took him about the same number of years that he is right now, that is 80. It took him 80 years. And John's point was that experience really matters here. And that guy didn't learn how to paint Marilyn Monroe and these other people in a couple of days. So if you're going to be choosing a photographer or filmmaker, don't forget about experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I did an interview with a person on something called the Local Business Show the woman's name, Laura Badal, and Laura had just started maybe a year or two earlier, an accounting business. She had been laid off by a big company and she decided to go out on her own. And she was naming different customers, people who were in accounting, people who were in business who didn't know much about accounting. And she would relay during this interview about an interior designer or some other person who had a business who would thank her, and they would say to Laura, if you weren't here to help me out with the business side of this, I would never have made it. I would have never succeeded. And her point there was that she finally felt that after working for large companies, this was the first time she really felt that she was touching people's lives, and that people, individual people, were really appreciating what she did. And she illustrated that by relaying these stories of these different people who had told her how much her work meant to them. So these anecdotes and these stories are so important. And I just want to add one other thing there, Lynn, for everybody. Another thing that I found that you got to be careful about when you're doing these interviews and you're giving examples is that you want to steer clear of acronyms, technical jargon, because unless your audience is an audience that's familiar with that, like if you're an accountant and you're using accounting terms to an accounting audience, that's great. But if you're an accountant who's trying to promote their services and you start using terms that people who aren't accountants wouldn't understand, that's not so great. So you want to speak in simple language, non-technical language to an audience who may not be familiar with all that technical stuff. And there's one other benefit that I think my guests sometimes miss out on of using examples and anecdotes. And that is, if you name a company, if you name a person during the interview, all of a sudden now that becomes something that you can tag, that I can tag, that you can share with that person, that might result in it having a longer shelf life, having more visibility given to it, that sort of thing. So there are a lot of reasons why, if you are going to be interviewed online or even not online, that you want to use concrete examples, name names if you can, clients and so forth if you don't think it's a problem, product names, whatever. It's more real and it grabs people's attention more and makes it easier for them to understand things.
All right. I'm going to pop your contact information in the chat. I know you have a couple other tips. You want to share them quickly? I don't know if people have to jump off, but if people can stay on, then they'll learn the last couple tips.
Okay, no questions.
No, not at the moment.
Okay. So everybody's taking copious notes, and they're nailing this as it will. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to give you two more tips, and in the interest of time, not that they're not important, they are. I'll mention these fairly quickly. This is something, again, that amazes me sometimes. You learn a lot of things, not only from being an interviewer, but also from being a guest. I've been on both sides of the mic. I should have mentioned that. More now, I'm doing interviews of people. I still do some where I'm a guest, but I did a lot more as a guest in my past career. You want to help the interviewer promote your appearance. And you can do this before and after your appearance. Before would mean things like, and I usually ask for these. In fact, I almost always ask for these from my interviewees. I want a headshot. I want a professional headshot. I want a short bio that I can put in the show notes. I want to get your website so I can put that in the show notes. Those are things at a minimum that I need. If you know of people that you're going to want to post about, if you want me to put tag words, that sort of thing. Those are things that I'd like to know about ahead of time. And I say I other people in many cases will want that as well. But definitely beyond that, let people who are within your network, your connections, people who are prospects, let them know that you are going to be interviewed. And as soon as you have an idea about when that's going to happen, let them know that too. Just like Lynn put out notice that I was going to do this program today. Let them know. Grease the skids. And once the interview is done and it's out there, share it with people. Support the interviewer in getting the word out. Post about it. Put it on your website. Backlink to the interviewer's website. There's so many things that you can do, and your agent, if you have an agent, can do to maximize the value and the visibility that you get from having been interviewed. I mean, you put in the time, why not do this? And yet I am amazed at how many people who have who I've interviewed, either themselves or their booking agency, they really don't do a very good job of this. They're just often too busy, or it's just not on their radar. And sometimes it may be because, you know what, you get interviewed today, it may not come out for 3 weeks or a month later. But don't forget about it. It's really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, we put our advertisements out 1 week in advance. It's because of the time that it takes it to sort of percolate out there and social media and on the internet. And it's really important that speakers who are tagged in the LinkedIn post respond, and comment on the post. Otherwise, it dies a slow death. So in the essence of time, how about
Yes,
you do tip 8 and give the short version?
I'm going to give the short version. This is an easy one. Often not done. Be sure to thank the interviewer. And if the interviewer is part of an organization, thank the organization. If nothing else, they'll appreciate it. It might make them more likely to bring you back if everything went okay. If you can like the interview on social media, that will help them. And that would include on LinkedIn, of course, but certainly other social media. If you would be so kind as to give them a testimonial, that would be even better if you like the way it came out, because they can always use those. And if they do use a testimony of yours, certainly with attribution, they can put it on their website, and there's your name out there again with your company. So that would be my last tip. Again, we could talk longer about that, but it's really important to thank the person. And if they're with an organization, the organization for having you be their guest.
Absolutely. So, some people talk about competition. I like the word co-opetition. So we can all help promote each other, and it's all good. So
Yes, it is.
okay. So other than the links that I've put in, is there anything else that you would like to share about how people can find you, or interviews, podcasts, etc., to
Right.
wrap up?
Yeah, I'll just say that if anybody is interested or knows somebody who's interested in promoting themselves or their organization, I do that principally. Thank you, Donna. I do that principally on the Voices in the Spotlight platform. And you can reach out to me at the website, which, Lynn, you've given everybody the website. You can
Yep.
contact me. We have a special report coming out, as I mentioned, which will talk about 5 terrific opportunities. And when I say opportunities, I'm talking about for job, career, business, or investment people. And if you're interested in creating your own podcast, or if you need a podcast host or a podcast advisor, that's something else that I do. And I'm on LinkedIn, so you can certainly reach out to me there as well.
All right. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap up? And somebody's asking, how do we get that report?
Donna, if you want the report, again, contact me either through LinkedIn. Lynn, was my email address shown? I'm not sure if my email address was shown. I forget.
Yep. Yep. It was there.
Okay, or you can contact me by going to my website and writing a message on the contact us page.
And
All right.
how do I reference the report? What do I call it?
Call it the looking forward special report, number 1.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and it's going to be about 30 pages, and there'll be a nominal, and I mean nominal fee for it, but if you get one idea from that, it'll be well worth it, and you will.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeff. I got to run. I have a 1 o'clock. Thank you, Lynn.
I
This
get
was
it.
great.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Donna.
it.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all for coming. And I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you, Jeff.